Sitting shall resume. Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I address this chamber at a time of great agony and confusion in our nation. There's agony and confusion about the state of our national affairs. There's great concern about whether the country is doing the right thing in the right way. There's also great concern and agony as to whether the standard of living we've become accustomed to in this country can be sustained, and what we have to do to give our people the assurance that the future is likely to be better than the past. And in this presentation, Madam Deputy Speaker, I intend simply to reflect on these various issues. What really is at the core of what is happening in our country? Is the government pursuing the right policies and the right strategies? And what about the future? And what can we do to assure ourselves of a brighter future? And I start, sir, with the, Madam Deputy Chairman, with the issue, exactly what is at the core of the problem our nation seems to be facing. And I say the core because there are many aspects to it. But from my vantage point, at the core of our country's problems is a problem that is known in the economics literature as a debt overhang. A point comes in the life of economies when the size of the debt and the servicing of the debt is the biggest constraint to the growth and the development of our country. You can understand it, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I relate it to your ordinary circumstances. If you were in a position where 60 cents out of every dollar you earn every month had to go to the payment of your debt at the bank, leaving you with only $40 to buy food, medicines, send school your children, meet your utilities payments, you would have a significant problem. And in the literature, in economics, that debt overhang is said to occur when a country's debt to GDP amounts to about 90% of GDP. Some folks, in examining the Caribbean situation, Mr. Kevin Greenidge and others, say it occurs even at a lower level, at 90%, at 60% of the GDP. When it happens, when 60 cents in every dollar of government's revenue has to go to pay debt, it means that government does not have the money to fix the roads, it does not have the money to send people to university, it does not have the money to keep the hospital fully supplied and do all the things that people want to do, have done in a good society. At the core of Barbados' problems is a debt overhang. In this year's estimates, as you will see, our total revenue available to the government of Barbados is going to be $3.2 billion, but the amount required to pay debt is $1,691 billion. 60% of every dollar in government's revenue has to go to pay debt. And so for the last 3 years in this House, I have, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been pleading with the government to recognize that this moment was coming and that it's not going to go away. For the next few years, the debt, the amount of government's revenue that is required to pay the debt will remain at that same level, and Barbados' debt to GDP will remain at one of the highest in the world unless we do what other countries have done. All the Caribbean countries that are now growing have found programs to refinance their debt. Guyana, under the HIPIC initiative, all Caribbean countries under the auspices of the International Monetary Fund. The minister said, sir, that he's going to deal with it now. I think it is late. I think it is urgent. But it will be unsustainable for Barbados to exist as we know it, with debt accounting for 60 cents, debt service accounting for 60 cents of every one of the dollars owned by the government. So, is the government are the government policies, Mr. Speaker, the right policies for the time? And I want to say on that respect, in that matter, that the diagnosis of the problem as advanced by the Minister of Finance is correct. The prescription is not. And let me explain what I mean by that, sir. Madam, the Minister is absolutely correct that most of the growth in the Barbados economy and the prosperity we've enjoyed has arisen from the existence of a new sector called the international business and financial sector. 80% of our prosperity came from that sector. In 2008, something happened. Prior to that period, Barbados was the only country in the Caribbean that was enabled by Canada to have substantial Canadian business in Barbados. They paid tax in Barbados, but remitted no taxes. They didn't have to pay taxes when profits were remitted to Canada. It called the exempt surplus arrangement. No other Caribbean country had that arrangement. But since 2008, Canada has extended the same arrangement to all other Caribbean countries that have tax exchange information agreements, some that have no corporation tax at all. So that as a result, Madam Deputy Speaker, companies that have established in Barbados have left, and we have a great difficulty attracting additional companies. The Minister has pointed to the fact that it has left a hole of $256 million in the government's revenues. And that is true. Now, I say the diagnosis is correct, the prescription is wrong. The Minister has decided that, look, we are now down $256 million from taxes from this sector. He had one of two choices. His choice was that let us continue to maintain government services and spending, but let us try to replace the $256 million that was coming from the international business sector with a 10% tax on domestic sales and transactions. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, $256 million in revenue from the offshore sector is tax realized from realized profits and income, not on projected sales. And it is tax collected from export earnings that accrue from outside Barbados. It has no negative impact whatsoever on the domestic economy. But if you seek to replace $256 million in taxes from realized income from export sector, pure export sector, with $256 million by way of a 10% tax on domestic sales and transactions, you can only, as the Minister saw in this budget, you can only realize that if you affect negatively $2.5 billion of domestic transactions. You can only realize $256 million by way of a 10% tax if that tax falls on $2.5 billion of transactions. And that is why the economy is struggling. That you're replacing a tax that had no negative effect whatsoever on the economy with one that is affecting $2.5 billion in domestic transactions. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is not the appropriate strategy. It is not sustainable either. And the sooner, therefore, the government gets away from believing that you can replace a tax on realized profits with a tax on domestic sales, the sooner it will be for Barbados. And it will have to be, as I said, by fixing the value-added tax and by making adjustments appropriately to expenditures. Now, is the strategy correct? I want to say as well, Madam Deputy Speaker, in fairness to the government, that the strategy prescribed by the government to grow this economy at a time of fiscal consolidation is the correct strategy. The problem is that it is not being implemented in the manner in which it could to cause success. Now, I just would like to use this little chart to indicate to the country and the House what I'm talking about. The gross domestic product of the country is made up of what people spend, what investors spend, what government spend on goods and services, exports, less imports. When you're pursuing, as you are, a program of fiscal consolidation, you're reducing consumption expenditure, and the government, by its own admission, is reducing investment expenditure and government expenditure. So the only way in which you can grow an economy that is pursuing a path of fiscal consolidation to deal with a fiscal problem and a balance of payments problem is if you're increasing investments and exports at a faster rate than ordinary to compensate for the decline in the C plus the G. And the government, in fairness to it, has said this is what we want to do. The problem, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that it is not happening. You're not getting the capital inflows for a number of reasons, not least things happening at Bay Street and other places. And it is very difficult to stimulate exports at a very fast rate in a short period of time. And if this continues, Madam Deputy Speaker, Newton's law will hold. A body at rest will remain at rest unless some positive force is exerted upon it. That what is happening in our country is that you're circulating the same spending power, but what Barbados needs is a major injection into the income stream that will allow you not only to increase investments and exports, but personal consumption expenditure and government expenditure as well. You have to get all of the factors affecting GDP to work. And that's why I've been pleading with the government to consider the one means by which that can happen at this time. That the government of Barbados, like the other 96 countries in the world, are members of the International Monetary Fund. And the International Monetary Fund exists to deal with problems like this. Now, the government says they want to borrow $200 million or something from somebody else. A program with the International Monetary Fund would allow the government to have up to $700 million at 1% in foreign exchange. It would be able to pay back the income tax arrears so that people could start spending. The seat would increase. It would be able to give back all of the money it owes to the private sector so that investments can increase. And we will have an economy driven not only by investment and exports, but also by personal spending and investment spending. And Madam Chairman, I really want to press again that I'm not saying this because I love the International Monetary Fund, but because a time comes when that is the only, let me do that, when that may be the only option available to you as compared to the other options that you're talking about. And I'm not unmindful of the fact, Madam Deputy Chairman, that the government speaker, that it will come with conditionalities. And we can deal with that as well. Now, the reason why I want to plead this evening, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the government to look at this matter seriously, is because our reserves have fallen to $357 million. And when the reserves have fallen to that level, then it is quite likely, and I would like the minister to speak to this matter, it is quite likely that the government is now having to tap into a part of the reserves called our special drawing rights with the International Monetary Fund. Among the reserves of a country like Barbados is something called special drawing rights, which is a reserve asset that the International Monetary Fund allocates to countries that are in this situation. And a country like Barbados that is virtually run out of foreign exchange will start making transactions to sell its special drawing rights to be able to get the foreign exchange to pay its way. I therefore say to the government, and the minister can speak to the matter when he winds up, if in fact we have reached a stage where we are utilizing our special drawing rights with the International Monetary Fund, because they can only be used by the central bank, then it would be better if we have a proper program with the fund and have the access to the $750 million that would enable us to right-size the economy. And I stress the point that there has to be a stimulus in the short term to stop the decline, to stabilize and to bring about growth, where we grow about the medium and longer term matter of trying to transform the economy. The immediate task is to get spending power of the kind that you will get from the IMF, the CDB, the IDB. Injection into the income stream will stop the body from being at rest and will be the factor that would allow you to be able to start to grow. You have to do it, otherwise this body at rest will remain at rest. Now, I raise that matter, Madam Deputy Speaker, because not I'm mindful that if you go to the International Monetary Fund, there will be conditions. But the House has to be told that we have to have an intelligent discussion on this. The International Monetary Fund would have in the past related to countries entirely upon the basis of financial quantitative targets. It has changed its ways and now enables countries to have what is called flexible credit lines. I sat with the government of Grenada for a weekend when they had to prepare a program with the International Monetary Fund and help them to structure a program with the fund to fit into the new approach that the fund has to lending countries. And you have a situation now where the countries in the Caribbean that are growing the fastest are those that are using flexible credit lines with the International Monetary Fund. Now, I make the point because when I sat with the officials in the government of Grenada, what we were considering is very much like what the government of Barbados has made a document of this House. The Grenada program with the fund was based upon a homegrown document called a Poverty Reduction Program, which they presented to the fund, and the fund then tweaked it to fit within their flexible credit lines formula. The government of Barbados now has a homegrown program called its own program, a recovery program, that could be the basis of something to be put before the fund as the government's approach to rescuing the Barbados economy, to be tweaked after further considerations with the International Monetary Fund. And so the House was concerned as to why is this coming so late. I want to say to the government that if indeed you are using IMF special drawing rights, if indeed you are talking to the fund about a program, and if indeed that recovery plan is what you would in fact want to support a request for resources from the fund, well, let us have a large discussion about it. Those of us who have had experience in these matters, Madam Deputy Speaker, would like to make a contribution to it. But I'm begging the government not to go the way of Jamaica. In 1978, I was working in Jamaica, and you had this situation where the Michael Manley government had a two-pronged approach to dealing with these issues. It had those of us who were working in the National Planning Agency preparing an emergency production plan similar to the one in which the Governor Barbados has just put on the table. And it had a team in Jamaica, in Washington, negotiating an IMF program. And what could not happen is that those of us in the planning agency doing the emergency production plan were not aware of the macro dynamics of the thing that was negotiated in Washington. So you had a country with a macroeconomic plan conceived by the IMF and an emergency production plan that bore no relationship whatsoever to that macro framework. At that time, Dr. Compton Bourne, who later became the president of the CDB, he wrote a paper that was the subject of the most fierce criticism at the National Planning Agency and among the progressive forces in Jamaica. It was called the IMF Model and Jamaica. And in this paper, Dr. Bourne says Jamaica's problems are due to large unsustainable deficits financed by the printing of money, that the IMF Polar model explains it, and that the IMF model is the correct fit for Jamaica. At that time, the Jamaican dollars, Madam Deputy Speaker, was one Jamaican dollar 110 US. And rather than heed the advice, stop printing money, stop running large deficits, seek relief early from the fund. They went on, and today the one US dollar is worth, I lost count, Madam Deputy Speaker. The point I'm making to you is this. If the government has prepared a recovery plan, has brought it to Parliament at the last minute, if you know you're using IMF resources, if you know you may have to go to the fund, let us have a candid discussion on it so that those of us who have had little experience with dealing with IMF flexible credit lines and have studied the modalities of IMF relationships in recent times can make a contribution to it. And I want to warn the government, Madam Deputy Speaker, that, I'm not criticizing them, but there are people who I see advising the government, and sometimes you ask yourself the question, what is the expertise from which they draw in making their advice available? I hear all kinds of things about a government has a fiscal deficit that is unsustainable, so add to the deficit. I hear all kind of concepts that are based not on scientific evaluation, but on class interest, just class interest issues that, if pursued, would destroy the Barbadian society. And I'm pleading with it, Madam. Level with us. If this recovery plan has come at this stage, it is good that it is here. There are many aspects of it that you could use to build a relationship, not with the fund, but to help to rescue Barbados. There are aspects of it, Madam Deputy Speaker, that need to be addressed. For example, I have been given speeches that I cannot see how you can have growth and development in Barbados unless entrepreneurship, technology, and others become even greater aspects of it than the case in the past. The manufacturing sector, in this strategy that we are pursuing is outmoded based upon 1974 harmonized system of fiscal incentives. The world in manufacturing has gone on to global supply and value chains, and developing countries are fitting their economies into global supply and value chains without reference to fiscal incentives. Madam Deputy, one of Barbados's key issues is that 80% of the graduates from our tertiary institutions have to live abroad. their skills, rebuilding an economy on human capital. We have to find a way to get a larger proportion of those 80% back here, helping to grow this economy. I speak now in terms that we have to create smart cities where they can, from Barbados, sell their services wherever in the world and enjoy the benefit, Madam Deputy Chairman, Speaker, of having the same living conditions that entice them to live in New York and elsewhere. And these are the things, building a new economy upon the basis of entrepreneurship, technology, and innovation has to feature to a greater extent in the growth and development of this country than I have seen in this document. But let there be a full, this is the time for us to discuss in the election campaign, have a great conversation as to where we are going. I could not leave this debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, unless I also make the point that I agree with the mantra of the Democratic Labour Party that we are building not just an economy, but a society. And that my disappointment in these estimates is that there is no new striking program upon which the government is prepared to embark to recognize that there is social disorder and that the state can have things to do that can help us to address social disorder. I feel that the time has come, and I would like to see it move into these estimates where a compulsory national youth service at schools and other places, Madam, will have now to be a means by which we begin to address that disorder that wants now to destroy the fabric of this society. And I'm prepared to vote for it, no matter how much it costs. Barbados has been built upon values. I want to use the benefit of this, my little speech in this parliament, to say that parenting has been one of those strong values, and that the fathers of Barbados are failing this country, and that when I see people at the scene of crimes, I see only single mothers weeping for their children. And we need to have, I feel, a serious intervention to enable our social services to assist single mothers with sons at risk to be able to deal with their needs in a strong and proactive way. And I also speak to the fathers because I am a father with a child at school. And my daughter, who is at Queen's College, could not behave the way that I see children behaving at our secondary schools. But I know that just making fathers pay child support is not enough. I think we need now proactively to help the mothers, single mothers, who need counseling, who need help with problem sons, and whose fathers are not there. We have to find a program now through our social system to help them, to help us. And I would like these estimates to address these two matters, because we can't leave these estimates ignoring not only the economy is in trouble, but the society is in trouble. And if it is in trouble, the duty of a parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to rescue it. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have listened very carefully to the debates, heard the leader of the opposition, and I just want to make a contribution. And I know often I'm accused of being too critical of the leader of the opposition, but I agree with her when she says that the government must seek a mandate. But it also has to be the case that if the Barbados Labour Party wants to be the government of Barbados, it must seek a mandate too. And it will have, I think, to let us know what is in its contemplation in the light of these dire social and economic situations that I have just described, and that it is common knowledge. And I would like to, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you allow me to speak to my former colleagues, because they are my friends still, do not let yourself be intimidated by those who will cause you to accept false propaganda that things like privatization and other things cost you a government. The member for St. James Central, my very good friend, he ran a loss in 2008 when privatization was not an issue, and he ran a one in 2013 when it was. My good friend, the member for St. Michael's, he ran in 2008 and lost when it was not an issue, and he ran and won in 2013 when it was. The same thing for my friend from the city of Bridgetown. And I must say, the member for St. George, their party lost in 2008 when privatization was not an issue in St. George, but they won in St. George so when it was an issue. And I want to say to them that there's an important aspect of the heritage of the Barbados Labour Party, from Grantley Adams through to Tom Adams, through to Bernard St. John, and perhaps if you might not want to include me, we're just dealing with major economic matters, no matter how controversial they might be. It's part of the heritage of the Barbados Labour Party. And that they were wanting to feel that in this, they can join the great debate that is necessary in the knowledge that great causes, as Manley said, are never won by doubtful men. And that let the next election be a great, great, great conversation about the future of the land. And that those who served with me in cabinet knew that I used to tell members of my cabinet, if we have a problem, let us face it and let us fix it. And I want to say, as I come to the close of this address to the House, that what is before Barbados, sir, Madam Chairman, Deputy Speaker, is nothing that Barbados cannot cope with. What is before us, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the greatest challenge that we have ever faced, but that we must not fail Barbados. We have a good society where the greatest part of our social capital is that the people of this country want the country to succeed no matter who the government of Barbados is. And it is what sustained me in 14 years of leadership of this country, that I was buoyed up on the wings, not just of pride, but industry, in the knowledge that the people of this country want the country to succeed. And that is what we now have to tap into. We must not fail Barbados. And I want to say, as I leave Parliament for the last time, Madam Deputy Speaker, because this will be my last speech ever in the House of Assembly, that I do not believe that the next Parliament will have to preside over the greatest challenges that has ever been faced by a Parliament in this country, the greatest ever. They will have to make the greatest adjustments ever. They will have to do it with a certainty in their confidence that this generation of parliamentarians are no less equal to national development and the challenges therefrom than any other previous generations of parliamentarians. And I leave you for the last time with this exhortation. It has to come as it should come from the book of Philippians. That finally, my brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think of these things. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the people of St. Peter who have given me this historic opportunity to speak in their name. I want to thank all of those who I have worked with in 34 years as a member of Parliament and in various capacities for their indulgences, and for their support. I want to thank the speakers of this House for the generosity that they have shown me and enabling me to speak. I want to thank these so many public servants who have in so many different ways a members of the civil society that would have enabled me to have a political career in this country, spanning almost 35 years, including my years in the Senate. I want to thank them as I leave. And as I leave, I give this House the assurance that I leave fulfilled, feeling that I have done my duty to my people as God has given me the light to see that duty. Farewell.